Hey everybody, today we're going to be making this L-shaped oak desk on Modern Builds.
Start it up.
I'm going to start this project by building the top out of 2 pieces of 3/4 inch red oak plywood. I started by breaking down all of my pieces to rough size. I'll be gluing my 2 sheets together to create an 1.5 inch thick tabletop, but I want to leave enough material that way I can trim it to its final size later on. That way I have a good, clean edge. I built this piece along with a couple of others at my buddy Andrew Schultz's new podcasting studio, and this is going to be the desk for one of those spaces. We kept the material palette really simple, that way we didn't have to make a lot of Home Depot runs, as well as our tool selection. I built this whole project using only a circular saw and a jigsaw. And once I had my 2 blanks ready for my tabletop, I grabbed my go-to Gorilla Wood glue and I glued my 2 pieces together. I used a bunch of 99-cent squeezy clamps all along the perimeter of the tabletop, and then I grabbed a couple of bags of concrete to weigh down the center. That way I had a good, strong glue joint that would never separate. I gave the glue about an hour to set up, then I got my circular saw and straight edge back out and I trimmed my desktop to its final dimensions. You can see just how much cleaner the cut is compared to the glued up edge. One trick that I remembered to do about halfway through this project is to use painter's tape anytime I was cross-cutting my plywood. This keeps chip out to a minimum and gives you good, clean edges. I didn't want the inside corner of the desk to be a sharp 90-degree angle, so I just grabbed a quart can of paint and used that to mark a radius between the 2 circular saw cut lines that I already made, and then used a jigsaw with a clean cutting wood blade to cut that radius. The key for getting a good, straight cut with a jigsaw is just to go slow. If you try and push the blade, it'll actually deflect and stop cutting square. But you can see here that I took my time, and as I removed my painter's tape, I was left with a clean, sharp edge. Looks great.
Oh yeah. That's butter. Butterface.
And now that the base is complete and I have my standard dimensions set, I can move to making the base. But before I made any cuts, I made sure to grab my M2 RZ mask out of my carry-on bag. You guys see me wear RZ masks all the time. They're great for woodworking. They're super lightweight, comfortable, and convenient. And don't forget to use the code MODERNBUILDS at checkout. It'll always give a discount. Here, you see me ripping the plywood down into 18-inch wide strips. I'm going to be making 45-degree mitered cuts so that I have continuous grain wrapping around the apron of this desk. So I'll be the first person to say that making mitered cuts like I'm about to do with the circular saw is definitely not the easiest thing in the world, but hopefully I'm going to show you guys a trick to make it manageable if you want to do something similar. Right, Ben?
You got it.
Let's do this. So the first and most important step is to make sure that your circular saw is actually set to 45 degrees. Don't just trust the markings on your circular saw, get a speed square or some other way of measuring to make sure that it's exactly 45. After that, I made my first cross cut and I measured the distance from the edge of my cut and the straight edge that I had clamped down. This let me know the exact distance that I need to be setting my straight edge from where I want to be cutting for the rest of my cuts. And from there, I just alternated the direction that I was cutting. That way, whenever my pieces would combine, the grain would wrap around the cut and into the next piece. And the great thing about this project is if you're a little bit confused after the first time seeing it, I have to do it all again, so check it out. By alternating which direction you're cutting, when you have the pieces meet together, there should be a void that should create a 45-degree bevel that won't interrupt the grain on the outside face.
Really quickly, I'd like to give a huge thanks to this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the #1 shop for you to build your own website. And the best part is, you need 0 website building experience. Squarespace has a library of built-in designer templates that look incredible right out of the gate. All you need to be able to do is drag and drop files and edit text blocks, and you're on your way to a one-of-a-kind website. Squarespace sites look amazing on desktop, tablet, and mobile devices. That way you're sure to stand out no matter where visitors find you. And setting up an online store could not be easier with Squarespace. With a Squarespace store, you can accept payments online one and have unlimited products. So to learn more, make sure and follow the link down in the description. That's squarespace.com/modernbuilds to start your free trial. Squarespace is so confident in their service, you can actually build your own test site before entering any of your credit card info. Then, whenever you're ready to launch your first site, make sure and check out using the code ModernBuilds for 10% off your first site. Thanks, Squarespace.
And just like I mentioned earlier, the only clamps that we had on hand were the 99-cent squeezy clamps from Home Depot. So this made the painter's tape clamping method a perfect solution to this problem. I also used painter's tape on the inside of the joint to help protect the wood from any glue squeeze out. Then I could lay down a couple beads of Gorilla wood glue and clamp my first pieces up. The painter's tape on the outside of the joint is going to hold my pieces in place so that nothing shifts while I grab a couple of speed squares to make sure I clamp everything square. And even though this was a really rudimentary setup, it worked great, which was super encouraging. So I just worked my way through all of my pieces and was able to clamp each one up one at a time. As you could probably imagine, after I glued up my first couple of bends, I was confident, but still a little bit nervous about this big bend in the center of the base. I didn't know if all the additional weight was going to contribute to this whole thing failing, so I made sure to take my time and make sure to not rush anything. To be honest, I was expecting something to go wrong in this process. It had been a while since I had done any continuous grain mitered corners, and let alone tried it with such simple tools, but it was really cool to see that it still worked out great. And while all that glue was drying, I got some oak 1x2s and glued them together. That way I could make some 2x2 solid oak leg blanks. Then after the glue dried and I sanded them clean, I cut them to their final length. Before I attached them to the base though, I wanted to reinforce those corners a little bit more, so I glued these extra strips of plywood into all of the corners. This is also going to visually offset the legs from the base. It's basically going to make them look inset, which is going to add a little bit of dimension to this whole thing, since it's all made out of the same material. And from there, I could pre-drill and screw in all of my legs. Adding those extra piece of plywood also gave me a little bit more meat for these screws to go into, which isn't a bad thing.
Yo, looks good. Super pro.
And I used these small angle brackets to connect the desk top and the base together. I use these all the time and I'll be sure to leave a link down in the description. And once I had the top secured, me and Ben wiped down the whole desk to remove any of the dust and then put on a couple coats of water-based polyurethane. Typically, you would see me use Simple Finish on this, which is totally what I would recommend, but since we were in New York and we were limited to Home Depot options, that's what we went with for all of our pieces. So overall, I am very happy with how this project came out. I'm calling it the Oak Plywood Executive Desk, and I think it's just that. It's the perfect blend of mid-century modern, elegant, classy design with some simple DIY modern twists. It doesn't use fancy materials, the tool palette is really basic, and the techniques that you need to create such a cool look aren't very tough to achieve. This is going to be one of the production desks in one of the podcast studios of Andrew Schultz that I mentioned before, and that's why I left the opening in the base so wide. I know they plan on putting a couple of rack units for audio and video equipment underneath, so I just wanted to keep it wide open so that they could use it as they see fit. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you can stay updated every time I post new videos. Thanks a ton for watching, and we'll see you next time on Modern Builds.